So thank you everyone for joining us today. Super excited to be here. We have a wonderful group of amazing women of color who are doing the work around climate justice and movement towards a just transition. We wanted to center this around storytelling, and rather than do something where we're doing the traditional Q&A panel or a PowerPoint presentation. Oh yay, Rosalinda. Try and refresh your window, and sometimes that helps. So we wanted to kind of instead lead with storytelling, because so much around climate change is not necessarily rooted in our stories, and what you see in media, what you see in kind of the polar bear images is not necessarily how our communities are experiencing climate change or actively working towards solutions that are actually beneficial to our communities. So we wanted to start and break this into two parts, where there's four amazing folks joining me who are going to tell their stories about what brings them to this work. Who are they? Why do they care about climate justice as an issue? And then kind of share some stories about things that they're working on as part of their work, or their community work, or their life, right? And I really think it's important to root this in lived experiences and the experiences of our communities, and to really show that this is an issue that affects all of us, and that climate change is a threat multiplier that is really making existing inequities worse. So to introduce myself, I'm Jamie Stroble. I use she, her pronouns. And I'm here today, and I'm going to keep mine short because I want to make time for other folks. I'm here today because I grew up in Hawaii, and I've seen climate change directly impact the place that I grew up and that my family lives in. And so I've shared a series of images that are resonating with me around why I do this work. So on the right are, the top right is a picture from 2015, which is one of the first times that we had 3 Category 3 or higher hurricanes that were within days of each other. So if you look very closely, you can see the Hawaiian Islands between the first and second storm, and each storm is larger than the entire state. Every time this happens, everything shuts down. The ports shut down, people board up, you're encouraged to stay home. If you need access to medical care or supplies, there's quite a bit of rain that gets dumped on, and I know that some of our brothers and sisters in other parts of the country have experienced this recently as well. The middle and bottom right are from Rainbow Falls outside of Hilo on the Big Island, and the middle is what that waterfall normally looks like, and on the right is what that same waterfall looked like in 2018 as Hurricane Lane was passing by. It dropped about 4 feet of rain in 48 hours. And I have family that lives not far from here, and it's something that has become a life or death issue for many of our community members. I also added the Chinatown International District, as well as that's a picture of Mount Baker and some of the youth from the Wild Youth Program, which I ran for about 4 years in the Chinatown International District. And to me, our young people are a big reason of why I also do this work, because we owe it to our future generations to be tackling the issues now, and their voices deserve to be heard in the process. And shout out to Panam, who used to work with me. I see her in the chat. Passing it to Dinah.
Thank you, Jamie. And shout out to Panam too. Hi, Panam, and hi, everybody. It's good to be here. And I think Jamie's pulling up some slides from me and why I do this work. I'm originally from Danville, Virginia, a small town. I lived in the rural area, and there's a photo there of the Dan River, which is in the city. And the Dan River was a river that generated a place called Dan River Mills, a factory where a lot of Black people worked. The town is about 30% Black. And, that factory closed down in the 80s. And there was a little bit of flooding there when I grew up there, but there's often flooding from that river. And I'm sure that's a result of climate change. And also in the rural area, I'm just very mindful. I'm about to go visit, but uh, the hometown I grew up in, there's not even garbage pickup in that area. You have to take your garbage to a place about 4-5 miles outside of where we lived. And, a lot of people, because they don't want to go take their garbage to the dump on a regular basis, they may not even have transportation. They burn their trash. So all that's going up into the air, those pollutants. And I think about that and the things that small towns don't get and how they're often overlooked, and that a lot of people of color live in small areas. That's what's affordable to them. That's where, in Virginia, where a lot of people were able to get land because it's an agricultural area. And a lot of Black people were, descendants of enslaved people. And then they went into sharecropping, which means that you don't own the land, but you live on the land, and you farm the land. And that's why there were large families, because you needed all your children to make a living. And both my parents were sharecroppers. So these stories really resonate with me. And also, I talked about the pollutants and the particle pollutants that get into the air. And I knew a lot of people with asthma. I never knew as a little girl, what was contributing to that. But I know now, my cousin had terrible asthma as a little kid growing up. And I used to play with him a lot. He could only play for about 10 minutes and he would just have breathing difficulties. So I know what that's like by watching him and the impact it had on his life. So I'm here because I really care about the environment. And, I lived in a beautiful area despite all of this, where we had woods in the back and I could walk the woods with my dogs and really enjoy nature. I fell in love with nature. There's a picture or two of Shenandoah National Park. I worked there for 2 summers because I met a Black lady as I walked through the student union of my university. And she said, "We need people like you to work in a national park." I didn't know anything about a national park. Had never been there, didn't know what I was doing, but I learned. And that's a valuable story, that there is much we can learn. We're intelligent people. We know how things impact us. And we know that we want to keep the beauty around us. So I'm here for all those reasons. And I'll turn it back. I think it's a Debolina next. Jamie.
I think it's on to myself, Adrian. Hello, everyone. My name is Adrian. I use she, her pronouns. And if you can spot me in that river valley there, little hide and seek game for you. If you can see me in the photo on the left-hand side. I was born in Rochester, New York. Some of you may know Ithaca for Ithaca being gorgeous. And my climate justice story is very much rooted in rivers, as well as recipes of macaroni and cheese. Located in Rochester, New York, I was born across the street from the African Methodist Episcopal Zion Church, which was also a stop for the Underground Railroad. Also, Frederick Douglass lived there for 25 years. And the area is surrounded by woods and Great Lakes and gorges. And so from a young age, the natural environment was also a symbol for freedom. Little did I know growing up how that relationship would also become incredibly complicated. My young adult life was spent in what we call the DMV, so a little bit more north of Dinah, but the DC, Maryland, and Alexandria area, where I grew up and lived during the Obama administration. The White House personally was my national park. Later to find out that national parks can also include volcanoes like Mount Rainier. And I would root my adult life where we are today. My climate-related job on Mount Rainier showed me how the study of trees actually move, and this can be related to changing temperatures and changing climate. And I couldn't help with my roots in DC to compare this also to displacement and strategies, not only for keeping trees in place, but keeping our communities and people in place too. Coming from the Potomac and Anacostia River in Washington, D.C., I'm always thinking about species migration as well as displacement. And more so, the loss that I felt, I'm sure I'm not alone this year, the great pain only to be exacerbated by the relentless changing climate around us socially and environmentally. I personally have lost family related to the injustice rooted within, our food system and impacts spanning from heat-related illness, mainly caused to disproportionate impacts related to location and proximity to environmental hazards, made worse by climate change. That brings me to this work. It's very personal. So now more than ever, I'm centering my own health in my climate story as well, particularly as through what I feed my body. Being a vegan, I never thought I would say that a couple of years ago, but this for me is a form of Black liberation and my own liberation as a Black mixed race person. Not only to protect myself, but protect myself from the anti-Black food industry as well. No one's zip code should dictate or kind of describe what someone has access to eat healthy foods and the nutrition that's available to them. And so I heighten the importance of a healthy diet, not just to say that this is one way that we can advance social justice, but also thinking about how our climate is changing and the food that's available to us. I connect this also to pollinators and bees. Not only does heat impact us personally through related illnesses, but warmer weathers might mean that we see wildfires blooming at different times. I also learned this when I was on Mount Rainier. So in the same way farmers may rely on pollinators to stimulate the growth of crops, it's so important to understand the relation with climate change to prioritize resilience, not for us, but our diverse ecosystems. And so that's very much what brings me to this work, and I'll stop there.
So those are my photos. This is Rosalinda with Community to Community Development. And, when we talk about farm workers and Washington State and climate change, for us, environmental justice and climate has always been critical to how we survive economically and otherwise. So my background is having grown a farm worker in Skagit County, been raised as a farm worker in a farm worker family, and now the executive director of an organization that is working to be non-hierarchical in actually modeling a just transition in the way that we work internally and externally. We're a founding member of Front and Centered, where we're trying to actually center ourselves in the way that we want to see the world. And so what you see here in front of you in these photos are farm workers in Washington State that are struggling and fighting to survive. We have been, as farm workers, on the front lines of just about everything that this country has done wrong in the production of food. The agricultural industry was founded on slavery, and it continues to behave in that manner. And it is all about profit and extraction. And that profit and extraction on a big level is, I'm talking about corporate agriculture that has monoagricultural productions across the country, not just in the 10 or 5 or 6,000 acres, but in some areas in Washington State. For example, Columbia Chateau Ste. Michelle Wine has over 12,000 acres of vineyards along the Columbia River. And this agricultural industry with apples and cherries have thousands and thousands of acres that are sucking up the Columbia River and having industrial waste poisoning the water. But the worst part about this is the way that we as farm workers are used to actually maintain the profits of the agricultural industry, which is not about feeding people as much as it is about exporting very specific types of fruits that make a lot of money for the Washington State agricultural economy. And so we are the workers. We're essential, have always been essential, but have been dying slowly or quickly from the cumulative impacts of pesticides, from exhaustion, from poverty, and then most recently in the last 10 years, we have seen the impact of climate change on farm workers. farm workers migrate on the West Coast, especially from all the way from Arizona, New Mexico, and California to Washington State. And literally the migration has increased for farm workers to stay cooler because they can no longer work in temperatures 110, 115 degrees in the southern part of the United States. And so they come north where they can actually work hard in cooler weather. The photos that you see here are farm workers that are protesting the harsh working conditions related to climate change in Washington State and COVID, but also the women at the door are promotoras. We have over 20 farm worker promotoras in rural Washington State and Whatcom and Skagit County that are working with farm workers, educating them on how to protect themselves from COVID, but also climate. Of course, you've heard with the heat dome how many people in Washington State actually don't have air conditioning. Well, farm workers are living in substandard houses in rural areas of Washington State and had to deal with the heat dome, but not just at home, but also working in the fields in some very unenforceable and badly written worker protection standards to work in the heat. And these were temporary, as were the COVID protections rules and guidelines were temporary. We're not fighting to have some of those be upgraded and actually made permanent in Washington State in agriculture. I believe we have the photo on the right-hand corner that says Mi vida, mi dignidad is actually a mística that we set up honoring the farm workers that are dying with the COVID and the heat domes and the temperature changes, the fires and the smoke in Washington State. I don't know if you have another panel of photos with the just transition, because we are not just, or maybe that's going to come later. Sorry, I'm like not paying attention here. So we are working with Front and Center on developing, and in our organization, actually actualizing what a just transition might look like in agriculture. We believe that the extraction from Mother Earth by the corporate agricultural industry of water, the poisoning of the air through pesticides and chemicals and the runoffs that are coming is damage that is being done. And the food system is key and central to a just transition, not just for better and healthier food systems, but also for the protection of people, which is what has kept the agricultural industry profitable. So I'll stop there for right now.
That would be hello everyone. I'm Debolina, Climate Justice Policy Analyst with the Puget Sound Sage. I use she pronouns.
Debolina, can you speak up a little bit? It's a little hard to hear you.
I'll start again. Can you hear me well? You can hear me?
That's better.
Okay. So, hi everyone, I'm Debolina Banerjee. I use she, her pronouns. I am a Climate Justice Policy Analyst with Puget Sound Sage. We are a majority women of color-led organization. We serve the interests of Black, Indigenous, and low-income communities of color, workers and labor unions, and immigrant and refugee communities, primarily in South Seattle and South King County region. And we work in partnership and coalitions with our communities to advocate for racially just and equitable policies. I am an immigrant from South Asia, India to be specific, and my personal story very much stems from my lived experience and the experience of my community having grown up there. India is a country on the front lines of climate change, as you all know, due to multiple factors. And here I have a few examples to show you. Pretty sure this will resonate with a lot of you who have family and loved ones in other countries and are facing the impact of climate change in real time. So you would see number one, which is Delhi, the national capital, which has one of the worst air qualities in the world and comes up in news all the time. Number two, you would see, how droughts and economic injustice has worsened the farmers' crisis in our country, where farmers have, in mass, committed suicides over the past years. it's a serious problem and serious issue that's not yet been addressed in the country. Thank you. Number 3 shows you how our forest cover in central India has drastically reduced over the period of like 4 years. Number 4 talks about the change in temperature and how some of the regions have like rapid change in temperature, rise in temperature over a few years, from actually over the span of 10 years. On the topmost right corner is a picture of a cyclone that hit my region, my city. It's an urban city of Kolkata, and the entire region is in eastern India, and like totally stopped life for a few days. And this cyclones, the severity and intensity of cyclones have been like intensified over the years, and that is where my climate justice work actually started, from one of those cyclones, being on the forefront on ground for relief work for one of the cyclones. And that is some of the group of the pictures that you see, number 6. This work, as you can understand, it's very, very personal to me, be it through lived health impacts or other social justice outcomes. But this particular experience of mine, being at the forefront of disaster relief work at Sundarbans, which is on the eastern delta region of India and Bangladesh, that's what kind of like my experience there cemented my commitment to continue work in climate justice. It's through organizing here I learned that the interconnectedness of issues, that climate change is indeed a threat multiplier for injustice of all kinds: social, economic, race, class, health, food, irrespective of city, country, or continents. And that's what steered me to this work. When we were organizing on ground, we had to think of what happens once the UNICEFs and everybody, international aid, pulls out, and the farmers who've lost their livelihood, who've lost their loved ones, and also their livestock. How can they actually jump back? And we worked with some experts who are like not technical experts in the conventional university education sense. They were farmers on ground who have helped revive salinated land, have like years and years of generational knowledge, who worked with some of the farmers. We worked beyond language barriers to think about how we can bring back some of those lands, paddy lands, which were already inundated by saline water, and how we can, grow food over there sustainably, so that communities can feed themselves and not have to depend on international or even national aid. So we work with a group of 25 willing farmers, and that response, the way the work was done, the way we all did the training and train ourselves, and everybody actually went through a separate set of training, not just like how to do stuff, but also understanding how to work with government and how to advocate for ourselves and how to have that self-determination in the first place. And it started with a group of 25 farmers, and over the years, that was in 2009. Over the years, we have around like 18,000 farmers who have adopted organic and sustainable cultivation techniques that they've taught each other. Each farmer became trainers in themselves, and they just learned from each other. And what happened, it's also a model where some of us who started the work being just facilitators, we moved away from that place. We moved away from Sundarbans. I'm sitting here in Seattle right now. I'm in touch with my community there. But we also developed shared leadership in the process, and we had shared, the spirit of the work continues, the values, the commitment of the work continues, because we developed shared relationship, shared leadership, and that's what continues to move the work currently. So I will pause there and pass it on to the next one.
Thanks, Debolina. You can tell we have a really wide array of just amazing folks doing really great work all across both Washington and beyond. And all of us live in Washington State now, and we are also experiencing the direct impacts of climate change here. So just for folks who may not have been exposed to that just yet, we are seeing things like the heat wave we had in June, as well as now a regular wildfire smoke season, which wasn't there previously. And it's just important that we are acknowledging who is disproportionately impacted by that. And Rosalinda shared a lot about what the farm worker community is experiencing there. And so really making sure that we have the resources to support our communities. I also lost someone I used to work with due to the heat wave, due to underlying health conditions that, couldn't afford to go to the doctor. And I think it's very real that climate change is here and that is impacting our communities disproportionately. And we didn't want to end on kind of a depressing note, because this is also about stories of resilience and stories of action and stories of what our vision for the future is. So our next round of stories are really going to be folks sharing what they either want you to take away from this, what their call to action is, or a story that they that resonates with them around something that maybe is inspiring them for what the future may hold, and really kind of share some perspectives across all of these places. So we're gonna start, and I should have had that slide up while we were talking. And we do have, I know that we're gonna lose Rosalinda right at 2:50, so we're gonna make sure that they can get in and be able to tell their story. So if folks have questions throughout this, feel free to post in the chat, and then if we have time at the end, we will get to them. So we'll start with Rosalinda.
Thank you. I really appreciate letting me go first this time, because what I want to share with you is I resonated with a lot of what the rest of the speakers have been speaking about. I'm a Mexican American. The farm workers that we work with are indigenous from Mexico and also Mexican people, Nicaragua, El Salvador, Guatemala, Venezuela. So the farm worker population in Washington State has grown a lot from South America. Again, a lot of the displacement that's happened in South America is climate related, but a lot of it is a combination of climate and corporations from the US and other parts of the world displacing peasant farmers in other parts of the world. So what we've been working at community to community, I think one of our biggest focus has been actually the formation of a people of color led climate change policy organization, like Front and Centered. And so we participate with other organizations. I know Debolina has participated in it also, where we combine our power to bring issues at the policy level to try to shift some of the issues going on. For us in agriculture, this has been an ongoing process for as long as we can remember. But one of the things we're focusing on is actually, like I said before, manifesting what a just transition would look like for farm workers. These photos on the upper left-hand side, you see a field of blueberries, and this is an organic farm, 65 acres, that we are developing into a farming community that will be a cooperative led by 4 farm worker owners, and these will be families that will actually be living on the 65 acres. We started farming this piece of land in 2017. Most of the farm workers, if not all of them, are landless workers. So it's been really difficult, and I really resonated with the what Dinah was talking about, with their farming, skilled farm workers farming on land that is not theirs. And they don't get to benefit from the profit being made from the excellent work that they do growing crops, but also being impacted by pesticides. So this is an organic farming community that will be built. Right now, we have greenhouses. It is totally solar powered now. You can see the chickens. You may not see in the background, there's also goats, and there's vegetables being grown, but also about 30 acres of blueberries, raspberries, strawberries, and blackberries being farmed here that are being sold to different community food co-ops. There's the mural that you see there in the center is actually a mural that was created for depicting some of the worker owners on the farm. They have created their own label, Cooperativa Tierra y Libertad, which is, Land and Liberty is the name of the co-op. And their farm worker owners are very proud of being able to produce their own, as you can see by having Emiliano Zapata as part of their logo of the farm. So our work has been to fight and fund ways to buy land and to have this land be actually farmed by farm workers so that folks can see that if we had the self-determination to grow food and create a food system, this is what it would look like. It would be collective, it would be community-based, it would be organic, and it would be safe. And every piece of land that we have with farm workers owning it is a sanctuary for folks that need sanctuary and need relief from the oppression that's happening in agriculture. So for us, it's that at the micro level, at local communities. At the big level, we're working with our allies to try to look at policy and regulations on heat, on worker protections, on protecting the environment. It really resonated with me, Dinah, also when you talked about the national park, and also Adrian. We have farm workers living in Northwest Washington in such beautiful environment that don't have the time or the energy to actually visit a park and enjoy it the way it's supposed to be enjoyed because they're exhausted. So, that's part of the just transition, is when we can enjoy the good stuff that everybody else is already enjoying now. And the good stuff for us is Mother Nature. It is a clean mother. And we're working very hard to do that. And I thank you all for listening. We have more information on Tierra Libertad and the farm workers in our cooperative development models, because that's really how we see self-sustaining, self-determination is cooperatively owned, collective decision-making and community building at the local level and also the state level. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Rosalinda, for sharing that.
Well, these conversations give me hope, no doubt. All of you and the folks that we know who are alongside us in this work, with all of the research and stories and the narrative that are speaking truth to power, I'm just constantly reminded how, the river I grew up on, the Potomac, the Anacostia, has taught me so much to look upstream for the problems that are caused downriver. And this is more so in my current role at the Duwamish River Cleanup Coalition. The Duwamish River and its resilience and community is a main source of hope as well. Inspired by a community that continues to just hold actors accountable and big polluters accountable for their commitments to advance environmental justice, and not just by planting trees, but within policies and systems and intense change making to eventually eliminate health disparities, especially related to the Duwamish Superfund cleanup. And that river will be cleaned up. Not to give too much away, because I encourage you to visit, but the photo on the left-hand side here is from the National Museum of African American History and Culture. And if you have had the honor of going there, I highly recommend visiting, if ever a possibility. But you come through this experience and you eventually enter this room where you see this quote. And this quote reads, "We are determined to work and fight until justice runs down like water and righteousness like a mighty stream." And I'm pulling a lot of water and river references here, but I think about sea level rise and I think about intense flooding, but I'm also reminded that we also can be as mighty as a stream or like water to rise and to come up with these great creative solutions led by community in order to increase our resilience and more so to make sure that racism does not destroy our planet and to remind ourselves that how we treat one another is essentially so important to also how we treat our natural world. And so, you know, when I visit a place like this, or when I'm talking with friends or that kind of thing, I am just reminded how also I'm feeling like a lot of representation is coming into very important positions of power, positions that have a lot of leverage to, you know, put together anti-displacement strategies, or to build more affordable housing, or to bring intense investments that are really going to make a significant difference for communities. And so seeing more and broader representation and underrepresented identities in these roles is also a third thing that's giving me great hope, because we are becoming the majority in these spaces, and that's incredibly exciting. So that's a third thing that gives me great hope. Thank you, everybody.
I'd say relationship building, solidarity, and participation are key to our movement, and I feel immensely hopeful about these three key aspects. This is the way we can build power together across communities, across cultures, and across generations. Um, Drawing from the examples of relationship building and participation, I've put up pictures of our research, Our People, Our Planet, Our Power, and Powering the Transition. These were reports for Our People, Our Planet. That report was an attempt to understand where our communities stand in terms of climate preparedness. And Powering the Transition was done in 2019. It was a similar attempt to understand how our communities engage and interact with energy, and where they stand in terms of equitable energy access. For SAGE, our philosophy of research-based policymaking centers the experience and stories of low-income, Black, Indigenous, and other communities of color, and the people most harmed by climate change, most vulnerable to climate change. And in this process, what we hope to do is equip and empower our communities and ourselves to take an active role in any climate and environmental decision making, as well as build meaningful relationships in the movement. What also gives me hope is that by organizing outside of government, we are able to push the needle bit by bit, where government is leaning more and more into engaging with community and recognizing the importance of community-driven policy. I bring the examples of the Equity and Environment Initiative and Green New Deal, both as examples of what can be possible if we have a strong organizing on community side and champions in government, whether it's elected or staff, who have the political will to drive the priorities of communities most impacted. And most impacted by historical injustice that led to climate and economic injustice in the first place. Lastly, I would like to close by saying that, we need drastic steps to save our planet right now. We are like way late. And that means we have to move towards a regenerative, just transition economy from the status quo of extraction and fall solutions. As I mentioned before, we need true participation, which takes cooperation, sharing of power, equitable distribution of resources, acknowledging personal privileges, and recognizing and appreciating the skill sets that everybody brings, lived experience and values that everybody brings in this movement, even if it is like non-conventional. And it's like beyond checkboxes, it's beyond statistics. It's just we do it by lifting each of us here, each of us who are most impacted, each of us who have the least power. We lift each other up, and that's how we build hope, and that's how we build our movement.
Thank you, Debolina. We have just 2 more, and then so we might go a little bit over if folks are willing to stay with us, because you got to hear Dinah close this out because she is the most inspiring speaker. I wanted to stay on this slide for just a second because a lot of the root of the environmental justice work that I started in is actually on this slide, where working with our youth in the Chinatown International District, which has one of the lowest amounts of tree canopy coverage, experiences a lot of environmental injustices, both past and present, including the impacts and legacy of redlining, of I-5 being built right through the neighborhood, and recognizing that there really needed to be systemic level changes. And I felt like, helping my youth pay for their bus pass so that they could get home from my program when they were getting pushed farther and farther outside of the city because of displacement, just felt like we weren't getting at the issues, at the root causes, but really putting band-aids on things. And so one of the first things I got involved in was the Our People, Our Power, Our Planet report, and really having communities actually drive what is the research, how we own our own narrative and data and research, and be able to put that forward in a way that is actually compelling and acknowledged by policymakers, because once that it's in a report, for some reason it gets taken more seriously. But it's the same things we've been talking about for years and years. But that work of Puget Sound Sage and Got Green was really pivotal in 2016 of being able to push the narrative around environmental justice and climate justice is racial justice as well. And that work of institutionalizing at the city and the Environment and Equity Initiative, that was kind of my first effort in working in a policy environment. And that really led to me trying to figure out, how do we scale that up? How do we make it so that people who are most impacted by the problems are actually a part of the solutions and are actually directly put into positions of determining solutions? And so I ended up getting a job at King County and founded the Climate Equity Community Task Force, which I know Debolina and Dinah both serve on. And that work was the first time that, and a shout out to Patu, who is also on it, who is on the chat here. But that work, I think, was the first time that the county has actually institutionalized some of the things we've been asking for, the connections to affordable housing and anti-displacement that had never been talked about in the context of climate change work. Having food systems and food security be a part of that was never included in the plan before. And actually, there's a lot of committees and advisory boards, but to fundamentally shift that so that it's not just like, oh, we'll review your things, but actually have people within our institutions working that inside-outside strategy, having folks that yay, Risho was also on it as well. I know Risho is was also on the task force, but having that working together. And I know that the COO community, many of the folks involved in that were also big supporters of this work. But I think that intersectionality of both how all these issue areas are connected, how climate change is the thing we need to tackle in addition to, because it's going to make our problems worse. But I'm so inspired by so many of the folks who came together to be a part of this, who really worked hard and really being intentional about the leadership of lifting up new leadership too, that we're not tapping the same people every time to be in these things, but to also support our young people who are up and coming. So I told some of our representatives, can you actually bring one of your up and coming staff members to join you to be on this? Because we need to be intentional about lifting up our next generation of leaders in this space, right? So I put the image of the cross stitch of take time to heal, because one of my interns, I started our internship program, which did not exist before. And I brought over a course of 4 years, 4.5 years, over almost a dozen interns that were all people of color, young people of color, passionate about this work and how we bring that change back to our communities. And this was given to me by a former intern who actually made this for me, because she also said to me, I see how you're killing yourself doing this job. I see how you're killing yourself to do the work in the name of community. And it's so important that we take our turns to rotate out of the line of, I think it's Equity Matters who may have started this analogy, but the one of where we're penguins in the Arctic and there's the people on the outside who take the brunt of the storm and the icy storm, and then the ones in the middle are staying nice and warm and toasty, but they actually rotate so that the folks on the outside go inside and then get warmed up so that we all take our turns in weathering the storm. So really excited. Shout out to Vicki who took over my job at the county, and it's going to continue that work moving forward. I'm just really inspired by all of our community members who fought so hard to get this climate justice policy and framework in for the first time. And Dinah, take us home.
Okay. So you want me to just wrap it up?
Yes.
Is that it? Okay. Wow. There's some powerful stories. I understand why they call this session healing, organizing, and planning for the future we want. And I'll get hopefully a little bit of my story that I wanted to share in the wrap up. And stories are just powerful. They really, we all have stories, and I think we should encourage each other to share our stories more, because I think they really reach us on a deep level. A story quickly that I'll share with you that inspired me was there was a story in the news recently about a place in my home state, Union Hill, Virginia, and it was a story on land that was settled by formerly enslaved people, after the Civil War, and they settled on this farmland, and there's up to 5 generations of people on this farmland. And there was a local gas company, Dominion Energy, that wanted to build a 600-mile gas pipeline that would run through this farmland. And they wanted this town to have this compressor in the pipeline, which was a big pollutant that's used to move gas through the pipeline. And the residents resisted. This is a story about resistance and also about community organizing, which we need in this movement, climate justice movement. And, of course, what happens is the stories you've heard from the other ladies on the panel is, we often get bribed as people of color because, our resources might be limited. So they bribed this community with $5.1 million. They took people to Pennsylvania via helicopters to show them about a compressor in Pennsylvania, and everything was going to be wonderful. And they had to get this thing through the environmental review. I know a little bit about that working from on community development block grant. When you build something, it has to go through environmental review. And so to get this through this environmental review board, this company lied to the reviewers and pretended that this place that was settled by formerly enslaved people was settled by just a few Black people. They said that predominantly the people in this community were not Black. They said that predominantly the people in this community were not low to moderate income. They lied. And so there was a division about this because of the money that was promised, the jobs that were promised. They were going to invest this $5.1 million into the community. That's a poor community. And so you had division. And this is what often happens when corporations want to come into our community and bring something that, on the one hand, you bring jobs, and on the other hand, you bring pollution. And we find out that we have to sell our souls and our bodies for the future, for jobs. And some of us, we want those jobs. And I understand that there's a conflict between that. But we also have to look at what this these long-term impacts are of these pollutants on our community. Look at what happened in Flint, Michigan. Look at the water and how it's harmed the children there. Look at what's happening all over the country. These scenarios are being played out all over the country where corporations are trying to put infrastructure into neighborhoods of predominantly people of color, BIPOC people, and bring in pollutants to soil our earth and our land, and to use us in that. But these people resisted. They filed a lawsuit. They proved that the data that was used to reach the decision about this compressor that would allow it in the community was flawed data. And I want you to listen to what the appeals court, the federal appeals court said. It said, environmental justice is more than just checking a box. It's more than that. You can't just check a box and move on to pollute the earth. And so they've resisted, and so far they've stood against this pipeline. There's a photograph of the people there that I think Jamie has up. And unfortunately, this is so crazy, but 31 miles of pipeline was built and 83 miles of trees cut before the pipeline cancellation. How does this happen in our country? That before you even make decisions on bringing things into the community, you've already destroyed the earth that these people settled on generations ago. And I say this to say that, as all of us have said today, this work can feel so overwhelming, but I promise you, if you stick to it, if you get involved, there will be joy, laughter, growth, grace, deep friendships, learning, and thankfulness along the way. The climate justice language and the data and the culture can feel alienating, but we got this. We know this as frontline community members. It's affecting our lives every day. We know that breathing in particle pollution from bad air leads to asthma. We know that if we live in a neighborhood that's surrounded in concrete with few trees and green space, that when temperatures soar to 90 and 100 degrees, we get sick and we need medical care. As Jamie said about our friend, we die. We know that government can choose to allow lead in our water, dump waste in our backyard, and pipelines in our neighborhoods if we don't get involved and use our power and our voices to protect our families and community. It's important, too, for us to help shape decisions and policies that impact our present and our future. So often we hear that climate justice is something we should leave to future generations. But as Jamie said, yes, we get those future generations, we get those young people involved, but I can see the ridiculousness in this option of leaving things to future generations, that the young people will take care of this. If we don't work now to change the trajectory of where the climate is heading, the quality of life and lifespan of future generations will be dramatically lessened. No matter what, don't give up. Keep fighting, keep pushing, like the people in that town in Virginia. Know that this is our battle. You will be surprised about who you are influencing, moving, and enlightening. When we give up, those who only see the earth as a commodity, strictly for selfish use, as Rosalinda talked about with the farm workers, those people win when we give up. Making sure that the earth, the environment, is a legacy, a blessing, a gift for all of us, that we share. We share this vision. We lose that when we give up. Our vision is stronger than those who oppose the positive changes that we seek. Keep fighting for climate justice, and thank you so much.
See, I told you, maybe we can all go off mute. And Dinah always has such inspiring words. And I'm just so appreciative of Debolina and Adrian and Rosalinda for sharing all of your stories, for coming together. This has been so powerful, and I hope everyone who is on this also felt the power of those stories that were shared today. If you have any questions or want to reach out to anybody on this panel, you can feel free to drop something in the chat. We'll stay on for just a couple minutes, but I know that we'll shortly be closing out to the main stage. So we want to make sure you hear from Fern and Roger too. So thank you all so much for joining us today.